Thousands of doctors around the world are fighting for people's lives, performing real achievements. And given the tendencies of the past year, they can hardly be surprised with anything anymore. Be that as it may, our story today managed to conquer the hearts of millions of people in the shortest time, and made many of them think that support can often come from where you least expect it, and even when you feel like everyone has long forgotten about you. One of the nurses working in a city hospital told of an incident that happened recently. An elderly man was brought in with a heart attack. The ambulance was called by one of his neighbors, who noticed that the man wasn't feeling well. At the hospital, the patient was immediately taken into surgery. The doctors and the hospital staff worked quickly and managed to save the man's life. Because of his old age and the possibility of his condition deteriorating quickly, the patient spent some time in the intensive care unit. At the same time, none of the hospital staff could have imagined that strange things would soon begin to happen in his room. One day, a nurse named Anastasia noticed a pigeon sitting on the ledge of the intensive care unit window. But the woman didn't read much into it. It wasn't all that unusual. But then it happened again. The next day, the poor feathered fellow still sat by the window and looked at the man in the room, and neither rain nor heat could chase it away. Time passed, and the patient gradually came to his senses, and after a while, he was transferred to a regular room with other patients. But even though the patient moved, the pigeon didn't fly away and abandon its post at the window. It simply moved to the window of the patient's new room and continued to sit there. Strange, isn't it? But then there was more. Sometimes the bird left its post, but it would always come back. At one time, it even began to nervously peck at the window. This went on for several days, and when the hospital staff opened the window to let the fresh air in, the pigeon flew into the room and landed on the old man's bed while he was fast asleep. The pigeon walked around for a bit, and then jumped onto the windowsill and settled down there. When the nurse was making rounds, she noticed the bird and immediately chased it away. But since it was summer, the hospital staff had to open the windows in each room anyway. So the next day, the pigeon flew into the same room again and did the exact same thing. At first, Anastasia thought to chase away the unwanted guest again, but then she decided to watch it instead. The pigeon sat on the man's bed, then jumped onto the windowsill, and sometime later, it flew out the window and circled nearby. It did so every day. The bird began to fly in even when the man was awake, and of course, the old man didn't chase it away. Watching his guest, the man muttered something softly under his breath and didn't take his eyes off it. A while later, when the doctors were satisfied with how the treatment was going, they allowed the old man to take a walk in the local park. The nurse watched the old man through the window, and as soon as he got outside, pigeons immediately gathered around him. So, the man took pieces of bread from lunch and fed his feathered friends every day. The nurse was amazed at the bird's love for the patient, but she didn't dare to ask why the pigeons were so quick to gather around the old man. The woman was also wondering why no one has visited their patient during the entire time he was getting treatment. So, plucking up her courage, she decided to ask him about it. It turned out that the man had 2 children, but during his entire stay at the hospital, he hardly spoke to anyone. Moreover, it wasn't hard to notice that he was sad all the time. At first, he was reluctant to talk about his life, but did eventually tell that his wife had passed away a few years ago, and the children had long started their own families and didn't come to visit their father much. They probably didn't even know that the man was at the hospital. Unfortunately, it seemed that no one really cared about him. So the nurse asked about the pigeon that came to visit the old man every day. And why was it that pigeons always gathered around the man as soon as he got outside? And it turned out that breeding pigeons has been the old man's hobby for a long time. There was a small dovecote in his yard, which the man had been tending to for several years, and that's probably why his loyal birds tried to visit their friend every day. The man said that he didn't know how they even figured out that he was at the hospital, because it was several stops away from his house. At the same time, he was pleasantly surprised and even shocked when he first saw one of them come visit him at the hospital. Fortunately, 3 weeks later, the old man was discharged from the hospital and got to go home. Meanwhile, the nurse shared this story online, saying, "It's been 23 days since this patient came to the hospital, and in these 23 days, nobody from his family came to visit him. But there is a pigeon which comes every 2 days to sit next to his bed. The pigeon stays for a while and then flies away. People forget, but this bird remembers. Don't forget about your elderly mothers and fathers, because even a bird can be loyal and compassionate, Unlike so many of us, even a regular phone call can make our parents happy, and the time spent together is simply priceless for them.